So hi guys, we're back. Brigitte Kingsley, I'm a producer and actress.
Andrew Simic, writer, director, editor.
And this is our second episode of our podcast about filmmaking. So last time, what we did is we talked about how we got into the industry and a little bit of our background. And today we're going to talk about our new project.
So, whenever you start a new project, you got to know that you're going to be spending a lot of time with this project. So you better choose wisely. When we were doing Dark Rising, if you remember, it came about very quick, almost like we didn't have a choice, and probably one of the best non-choices of our entire lives.
It was really fun to be Somerville for many years.
Yeah. So with this next project, I mean, we had done. As a writer, you kind of go in phases, and I had just finished Night Cries and Country Crush, and while on the surface that may seem very different, Night Cries. Post-apocalyptic action thriller, Country Crush, a country musical. But as a writer, both had a similar running line through it, and that is this idea of circles in life. So as a writer, I would say that both movies were similar in that I was writing about a similar theme. And when we were looking at doing new projects, we always like to expand what we do and do things that are different.
And sometimes we kind of get into a phase, the way we come up with concepts, it really is organic most of the time. So with a lot of the things, like let's say Country Crush, which is a country musical, it was literally, we don't know nothing about music, let's expand that knowledge. And we had some friends that had a great library of songs. So we were driving back one day from up north, and we threw their library of songs in the car and started coming up with concepts. Andrew started structuring a script, and next thing we knew, we were doing this country musical, and our world was really horror, sci-fi, comedy. It was nothing like country music.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love movies, and that's all kind of movies. Like Singing in the Rain is one of my favorite movies of all time. And as with the success of Dark Rising, I don't want to say I got pegged, but you just for 7 years, that's your life, is doing Dark Rising, shows, and it's a lot of fun. But then everyone's like, well, that's what you do, and you kind of say, well, I'd like to do other things as well. So when it came to doing a country musical, it was one of those things where I jumped at the opportunity to do something like that, and when we announced it, that we're doing a musical, everyone's like, you guys.
I can't sing, guys.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we had just come out of those two worlds. So Night Cries was very dark, and it was a really, I think, difficult shoot in a lot of ways, just because of a lot of stuff that was happening in our personal lives. And so when we were deciding what our next project was going to be, we wanted to go back to something fun and light. And I had just come back from AFM, which is the American Film Market. And it was really eye-opening, because what was in all of the halls, for people that don't know what AFM is, it's a market that happens every year in Santa Monica, and all of the companies set up in two hotels, and there's all the posters on the walls of the things that they're selling, and you get an idea of what the trends are. And I was talking to Andrew, and I'm like, well, the trends really are either movies with a kid and their dog, which was very popular, by the way. The Christmas movies, or these Sharknadoes, and that kind of creature feature type of thing. So Andrew was in Calgary at the time, and I flew out to meet him, and we were going to drive back. So we had a lot of time to kind of think.
I don't like to fly.
You won't get on a plane.
I have a lot of issues. If you watch the first episode, I'm an introvert. Now I hate to fly. A lot of things. So I drive to Calgary to go visit my brother, and she flies to drive back with me.
Yeah.
I got to work on a lot of things.
He's got some issues, but he's great. So we were driving back, and we're like, what are we going to do? And I was like, we got to come up with something really crazy, because it's these crazy movies that are working right now. And it became a joke. So we were trying to think of what the dumbest idea we could possibly come up with. And Andrew's got tons of really
dumb ideas. That's where you were going with that, right?
So, yeah,
I have a lot of dumb ideas.
My favorite was Spider Bear. He was like, what about Spider Bear?
We basically decided we were going to combine, two maybe unrelated things into one. So,
Yeah.
spider bear, I would be terrified of a bear with 8 arms, right? Like,
And it was all these like just silly ideas, and we were laughing. My best idea.
it's a long drive.
It's
It's a long drive.
very long drive. I'm not the creative one, so my big creative moment was snow crabs. And Andrew's like, I think that exists. And I'm like, no, it's like these little white crabs that live in the snow. And then when people go for walks, they come out of nowhere and then they like eat them. And it's like piranhas, so there's all the blood that comes out of the snow. Still think it's brilliant, but didn't fly.
It's not it didn't. We don't fly. So.
But then Andrew was like, what about Rocktapuss? And we started sort of laughing at that idea. And then he's like, it's an octopus and it's got like an armor of rocks.
It lives in a mine,
Yeah.
right? In Northern Ontario, there are a lot of mines, and I was like, we could shoot it. And what started off as, just kind of, a joke and like, messing around.
Yeah.
You kind of get attached to ideas like, oh, I could do this, like, and it could be fun. So that's pretty much the way that concept started.
And yeah, like, so after 3 days of driving and thinking about Rocktapuss, it turned into Rocktapussy because we thought that would be really funny.
Yeah. James, I'm a huge James Bond fan as well. I remember, I don't know if you, Mark Daly and late great movies when I was a kid, my dad and I, we'd always, he'd let me stay up late to watch these movies. That's how I first watched Jaws and all the Roger Moore, James Bond movies. And I was always a huge fan. And as a kid, the name Octopussy always scandalized me, right? I was like, my dad's going to let me watch this James Bond movie. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't even know what that title means, but I know something's off with that title. So when we were coming up with the title, Rocktapuss, I was like, oh, well, it's going to harken back to those 70s, 80s movies, the pulpy, movies. So why not call it Rocktapussy? So that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah, that's how it was born. And then by the time we got back home, we were really attached to the project and we started developing it. So the first step is always the creative, a mix of, I guess, the creative and the budgetary
and also
level
the demand. I mean, you went to AFM, you were looking at what people were, buying up and looking for. So you kind of, maybe one of the things we've learned over the years is maybe don't throw all your energy into a project that no one actually wants to see at that point. And look, it's very hard. Trends change.
They do.
Right? I mean, you start on something and 5 years later it's passé.
It's true. We kind of got lucky with Country Crush, actually, because Country Crush, when we started, there was no country musicals. It wasn't really popular. There was Glee that was out there. And then now that it's coming out, March 14th, by the way, it's at the same time as La La Land. So it's sort of, we got lucky that way.
So everyone's going to be like, oh, wow, these guys are taking advantage of, they're just, doing what La La Land did. And really, we've been working on that for years. Right? Yeah. I'm sure La La Land was many, many more years prior. It's just, sometimes it's serendipitous to release at the same time, and sometimes it's not.
And so to go back to how we pick your concept and that sort of thing, the way we did when we started was, as we said last week, we put everything into medium raw. So all of our energy, time for the first, few years was into that. And it was only once we expanded and were open to other concepts that we did Dark Rising on the fly. And that's what happened for us, And so now with a lot of experience and some wisdom behind us, what we do is we don't just go with one concept. So Rocktapussy is our heart and soul. That's the one where it's like, we're going to have a great time. We're going to do this. We're going to make it fun and sexy and cool and use everything that we've learned and put into this. But at the same time, we have a business to run and we want to make more films. So what we've done is we've, at the same time, developed several projects. So the reason you go to markets and the reason why you meet with distributors and you talk to people is to find out what they want. So with Rocktapussy, it was definitely one of the things that, we've pitched. But when I went to the market, I didn't just have, obviously one thing. You have a lot of different ideas and you put it towards people and then you see what they gravitate to. So the trends right now are really, women in peril thrillers. They're very popular overseas, and we have the romantic comedies that are always, still very popular in the TV world. So right now, although Rocktapussy is what we're talking about and it's our focus, we're also developing these other projects because one of them might hit before this one. So, yeah. So want to go into the creative?
Sure. I mean, okay, so when we started with the idea of Rocktapussy, we have this concept, right? But with any concept, you then have to go about writing the script for it. And over the years, my writing style has significantly changed. When I first started off, the movies I wanted to make were those Star Wars movies. Empire Strikes Back was my favorite movie. I'd seen it at Ontario Place at Cinesphere, and it was the first movie I remember going to the theaters to see, and I was just blown away by the fact that the bad guys won at the end, and it kind of maybe changed the way my outlook on life is, probably for the worse. But when I started out, those are the movies I wanted to make, and a lot of times I would write these large-scale movies with big concepts. But as a young writer, you don't have the life experience to actually draw upon. And what I found was, even in these projects that maybe deal with incredible situations, you have to take your own life experience and give the characters the proper motivation for what they do. So with Rocktapussy, you kind of go into that with, okay, what's the story I want to now tell? What is the character arc? Yes, there's a giant octopus covered in rocks in a mine. That's, the one line of the movie, but what is driving the movie forward? I'm not going to tell you because I want you to go see the movie when we make it. But for example, let's talk about Dark Rising, Warrior of Worlds. Okay? Now, Warrior of Worlds deals with an incredible bad guy who wants to take over the world. And his father is even worse than he is. Now, that's pretty outlandish, right? I mean, I don't have any experience trying to take over the world, but what are the things that I do have experience with? Well, this idea of, in that project, it becomes a microcosm. Dark Rising Warrior of Worlds was the largest project that we had done in the Dark Rising world. With that scale, I lost a bunch of creative control on that project. Knowing that, so I put that element into the actual script, and you have this character who is involved in the machinations of taking over the world and realizing he's only just a cog. So all of a sudden, you're giving what you're going through at the time to the character. So you hope that it rings true, so you kind of write what you know. There's a reason why people say write what you know.
And the best part about that relationship is played by Colin Mockery, and the father was Scott Thompson. And what you see is that Colin, his struggle to really just make his dad happy. Yes, they're both demons and they're trying to take over the world, and it's big and it's grand and they're comedic. But at the end of the day, what works in that whole story arc in Andrew's writing is like, it's really just a guy trying to please his dad.
Right. So again, it's like that's kind of where you bring it back. In Night Cries, the original scripts for Night Cries was always like, it's the end of the world, it's the apocalypse, and everyone gets so wrapped up in the literal end of the world. And I got to thinking, I was like, look, every generation has their doomsday, right? And guess what? There's always going to be more and more after that, more life after that. Life will continue. So you start to say, it's like, I really don't know what's going to happen, but I know that the concept of this personal apocalypse, that is what Night Cries deals with. You bring that home and then you write about that. So as a writer, that's kind of, I believe, like in Medium Raw, I kind of just went for the fences, with that script. I was just writing big ideas. I had a dream one night about the wolf. I sketched out the wolf costume. I was like, this is the bad guy in the next movie. I don't know where it came from, but that's pretty much the origin of Medium Raw. And then I wrote the story around it. And then I kind of looked back and it's like, how can I be more successful as a writer? Yeah. And that's about writing personal stories, even in the grand scale.
Yeah, and then the other thing that comes with experience, let's take Medium Raw for instance. It was big, and there was big fights, and there was big characters and all that kind of stuff. And you learn your limitations as a filmmaker, because we're talking about independent film here. So when you get to set and you realize that you don't have the stunt team you need, or you don't have the facility to make these great big, Superman versus or Batman versus Superman movies, then you're like, holy crap, we need to make this concept live in the budgetary constraints that we actually have. So part of your journey as a writer has really been, how can I take these ideas and these great, concepts and put them in a world that we can actually build and that we can actually control within the budgetary constraints that we have. And that's the relationship that we really have. Andrew will come up with these things and I'll be like, okay, so this is how much money we have to do this. So what can we do? And he's really, through the years, has learned to be very, very clever with.
But you know what? It's also, I have been blessed with the team that I've been allowed to work with.
Yes.
In the past couple of years. I mean, like
sure.
I said, I think every podcast will have a mention of Jim Peacock, right? Because the fact of the matter is, I sketch out a side profile.
Yeah.
I go to sleep one night, I wake up at 2 a.m. and I sketch out the side profile of the wolf. And I'm like, I have no idea what it looks like from the front.
Yeah.
And I say, Jim, this is what I drew. This is what it has to look like. And sure enough, a week later, he comes back to me with a small paper version of the mask that I can hold, the jaws open, and I look at it, and I'm like, that's it. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can't say that everyone has that opportunity. So even in those situations, it's like I was blessed to have have a person that could help me with my larger visions, right, come to fruition.
So let's talk about, for filmmakers out there that want to create something within the restraints, tell us about your process where, like, what do you do in a script? What limits the expenses on the day?
Wow. Well, when you're writing a script, I hesitate to say limit yourself, because as a writer, if you're a writer listening to this or a writer-director, I'm going to let you in on a little secret that you may not want to know. The best part is writing the script, because that's when everything is on the table. You don't have to claw everything back. Everything is just what you can imagine. And for me to say limit yourself on the first draft, that would be like me saying go on a diet of purely vegetables. Like it may be healthy for you.
As a producer, go on a diet of purely vegetables. Seriously. No.
Like it's so much fun to just let the creativeness just flow. So I'm never gonna say limit yourself in that way. But after that first draft, when you have your fun and it's time to get down to business, then it's really those action sequences. Just know that any action sequence, for the safety of the actors, you're going to need a qualified stunt coordinator and a qualified stunt team. The thing with films is that we are dealing with a ton of people. And a lot of times when you're excited about something and you're blind optimism and you're going into it, you kind of have this notion where it's like, we're just gonna, somehow it's all gonna come together. And with stunts, and when you're dealing with people's physical safety, that's just not the right time to do it.
There are things that you get caught in a script that are extraordinarily expensive, and you might not think about it. But from experience, here are the things that I think we've learned to limit, which is locations. Unless you have a pool of, great friends that are willing to let you shoot at their house and their places or whatever, you really have to be aware of locations, because that's expensive. It's expensive to move your team. It's expensive to rent the spaces, and you're going to wreck something there. So it's going to be expensive to fix it. And then in terms of actors, the more actors you have, it really is your biggest cost if you're going union. Which is, we'll get into sort of the union stuff in a bit, but there's a great pool of talent, but you have to be aware of all the rules and the regulations and the costs associated with that. Costume, VFX, stunts, those kinds of things really do add up.
The reason why I was, focusing specifically on stunts, and you're right in terms of locations, is logistics. There's not really a way of getting around it. With VFX, like I remember when I started out, I just wanted opportunity, right? So it's like finding the people that want the opportunity to work and hone their craft. I mean, I'm not sure what people are like nowadays. I'm an introvert. I don't talk to people. You are the people I talk to the most right now. But when I was a kid, back in the day, I would leap at the chance to just get opportunities. And unfortunately, independent filmmaking, a lot of it relies on that, on on people wanting the opportunity to help. That's just the nature of what we do. But with stunts, because you can't really get around it. You know, you can't get away around it. You have to do it. I mean, I remember we were shooting medium raw, and my character has to go through glass, right?
He's picked up by a bad guy
and thrown through
literally thrown through a window.
And I was like, you know, again, I was younger, so I was like, hey, that sounds like fun, right? And I had to, you know, I mean, again, this is coming from that idea of pure, you know, excitement over the project. I mean, and also it's like, oh, I want to be able to say I can do it. And, you know, the stunt coordinator kind of came up to me and he's like, look, it's not a matter of not getting cut by the glass. It's about how much you're going to get cut. And again, Brigitte's always like, you know, on some things, you know, I won't get on a plane, but she's got to stop me from being thrown through a...
The only thing I really have to worry about this guy is literally with the stunts, because he's willing to do every single stunt every single time. And he's directing the movie, and he's also sometimes the face of the movie. So I have to stop him.
Well, so the way you know, I'm glad they stopped me. So you know, we throw my stunt double through the glass, and the knocker, you know, breaks the glass. So he's not actually breaking the glass. The way it works is the actor is thrown towards the glass, and the stunt rigger will hit a little explosive. It's a knocker, and it'll shatter the glass a split second before the actor goes through, and you kind of time it properly. And then you add the VFX to exaggerate it. Mm-hmm. And he got up, and you know, the entire back of the jacket was completely shredded, and he had little, you know, pieces of
cuts in his
head all the way in the back of his head. And I was just looking, I was like, probably glad I didn't do that.
And that's why they get paid a lot, right? Because they earn every single penny. Yeah. And so if you're going to write stunts, you need to keep that in mind. And, you know, we talk about limitations, but at the same time with Andrew, he actually doesn't put limitations on his script, because if you look at Night Cries, there's a million stunts. There are digital characters, entirely digital characters. We have animals.
Right. I mean, we're talking about what we've learned over doing, you know, different projects, right?
So it is doable to, you know.
And also, though, with Night Cries, I mean, I have a producing partner where I'll say, okay, this is the script. I really would like to do this. You're going to have to tell me we can't.
Yeah.
And on, you know, Night Cries, I was lucky that she actually never said I couldn't.
And things like even everything is possible if you're willing to make the phone calls. So, for instance, let's say Andrew really wanted a crane for some of the shots. And I mean, a crane is not an easy task to do on a low budget film. But if you make enough phone calls and if you structure the rest of your shoot well enough, then you might have some days where there's just 4 of you on set and you're shooting. And then there's some days where you're going to have 25 people, and that day is going to cost you a fortune. But you're going to get a really great day out of it, and it's going to make the project that much better. So it's really about knowing your budget, how to structure your days, knowing when you need people, when you don't, and doing it accordingly. Really.
Yeah, I mean, again, like that's a good point, because with Night Cries, we shot it over the course of a long time,
a year
on weekends.
Yeah,
and that allowed us to really pick and choose which days who comes in, right? So, I mean, there were some days on Night Cries where if it was just a scene that had you and I in it, we would really just have our director of photography, our production designer, and our sound person. That was it. You know, 3 other people.
There's a lot of days where it's just 5 of us.
Yeah, you would take care of the craft, you know, like it was really just, and the wardrobe, you know, and we had the freedom to do that, right? But in other projects, you have to know that those days are very tricky to pull off, because you have a block where you're shooting with an entire team, right? Mm-hmm. And on other days, we would have 25 people. We had 13 stunt guys for one of the scenes in Night Cries. Yeah. That weekend alone was a massive part of the budget. So one of the things that we love to do is actually answer your questions. And so I took to my Twitter and asked if anyone had any questions. And Chris Allen on Twitter asked me what was the difference between writing for movies and writing for television series, since I did both. And that's a really loaded question. We could spend, you know, tons of time specifically on that. One of the main differences is you have a longer amount of time in a television series to actually go through full arcs of characters, And in movies and films, you tend to want to establish that character as quickly as possible. Um, you rely, on archetypes, on characters that everyone can associate and peg quickly, so that you can move on to what you want to do, maybe thematically or whatnot, or not. I mean, that's a writer's choice. I tend to, on films, choose the archetypes and kind of play with those. Whereas television series, you have the time over time to take them through a different arc, maybe introduce them a little slower, and that also depends on if the television series is serial based, which is linked. Each episode kind of runs into the other, or if it's episode of the week, the X Files Monster of the Week kind of episodes, where you kind of just write a 1 hour mini movie with the characters. So yeah, so if you have any other questions, just hit us up on Twitter and ask us, and we'll in our next podcasts we'll try to answer them.
Yeah, so we're gonna wrap that up for now. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram. I'm at BEE Kingsley.
And I'm at Andrew Simic.
And we'll see you next time.